Hello everyone, and welcome to our RMI quarterly one-on-one live with myself, Irfanali, our managing partner here. Just wanted to say hop in, as some people are joining right now, so I want to say a big hi to everybody. Thanks for hopping on today. This quarter, we've changed it up a little bit, and we're changing it away from a little bit of an accounting focus and more to general business focus. But as always, any questions are welcome here. Happy to answer whatever questions you might have, be it accounting or business or whatever I can help. I'm happy to do so. So we'll give it another minute or two, let more people come in, and then as questions start to come up, just feel free to post them down at the bottom, and as they come in, I'll start answering away. But as I had mentioned, our focus for this quarter, we tried to change it up a little bit. Wanted to touch on some regular business things, including some grant opportunities, and so that's where I'll start today. And the first thing I wanted to touch on, I know some of you who are subscribed to our newsletter, we had posted about the CDAP grant, and the government recently, many people are familiar with it, but it was basically for digital adoption, and there's money that was initially available through to help do an assessment for your business to see what you may want to require and implement. And then that later changed to being available as a loan to help, interest-free loan to help implement some of those proposals through that assessment. And then that followed through to potential for getting some grant money for hiring people in this space or converting some of your existing staff to the space. So anybody who subscribed to our newsletter, you would have got a link in there. There is still some time till the end of this month to be able to apply for some of this. So please make sure you keep an eye out for that. The other big thing to make note of, for those of you that are subscribed, you know this as well. But in the US, if you have any US corporations or connections, there is some new filing requirements down there, talking about the filing requirements for connected corporations and what assets and everything you have down there. So you would have seen a note if you're one of our clients, and of course this is applicable to you, we would have sent a note on that. But to anybody else, make sure you keep an eye out so we can make sure you're staying compliant down in the US. First question came in: if you want to start a small business, what are the first steps you would take to ensure it's successful? Great question, and great with meeting with our topic, which is perfect. And what's funny is if you haven't seen this, make sure you check out a podcast, or not podcast, but a video series that I had done a few months ago, just on this topic specifically, on starting a small business and everything you got to really consider. But first steps you really want to make sure you're taking, I think, would be talking to somebody who understands structure in your business. And why that's important is because you want to set it up properly. If you set it up incorrectly, that's probably the most expensive mistake you can make, because down the road you can fix things, but it's going to be very, very complicating. You need to get tax lawyers, tax accountants involved to end up fixing it so you're not getting hit with big tax bills. So first thing I would recommend, sit down with ourselves, or there's some tax lawyers or things like that. And what you can do is sit down and make sure your structure is set up properly. Do you need a corporation? Can you go sole proprietorship? Do you need a holdco? All things I've talked about in the past, and those are things you got to really consider to make sure that your business can be set up properly and then be successful from there. Next question that came in: what should I include in a simple business plan? Well, that's a good question, and really I would say business plans shouldn't always be simple, right? When you're starting up a business, the most important thing you want to do is spend more time planning than actually doing. And the reason for that is because the better you can plan it out, the more successful you're more likely to be. So yeah, a simple business plan, basically any business plan, you should really be looking at what's the competition look like for your business? What's your cash flow needs, and what's your cash flow requirements? How are you going to fund that business? And you want to make sure you're very conservative in those efforts, because one of the biggest reasons businesses fail is because of a lack of cash. And so by end up doing some better planning and being conservative, you have, again, a higher chance for success. So you want to talk about your financial projections. What's your marketing plan? Who's your target market? And a lot of times people will keep these very generic and say, okay, well, my target market, say for an accounting firm, is businesses. Well, I'm not really going to market to businesses. I always going to market to people. So who are the people that I'm going to be marketing to? It's going to be business owners potentially. And what type of business owners? What are the things that they like? What are the things that they look for? What radio stations are they listening to? What are their hobbies? Because the more you know about that customer that you're going to be trying to engage with, the better you can target to them. So that gives hopefully a general overview. But one other thing I always suggest to my clients is if you're looking to get a good business plan template, the BDC actually has some really good resources. And Business Development Bank of Canada, off their website, they will give you some templates that you can actually use and build off of as well. Next question that came in here. Since capital gains inclusion rate increased to 66 2/3, do you still recommend keeping capital assets under business name? Great question, and a common answer that I always like to give, and I'm going to give it again, is it depends, situation to situation. So one of the big things you need to look at is how are those assets purchased? Is it personal money? Is it corporate money? Do you have another active business? What's the long-term plan? Do you want to sell in the next couple of years? Do you want to sell in 20 years from now, right? So the reason why it still does make sense if it's a long-term hold is because if you were to move the asset today, you could have some extra costs or some tax implications if it's an asset already in the company. And so you got to just be a little bit careful on that side. So right now, the general idea is if it's a long-term asset and it's corporate dollars, I'm still on the indication that, yeah, it still makes sense to keep it in the corporation. And the big thing too is we don't know what to expect with this inclusion rate. Could be potential changes coming down in the next year or two, who knows. So for me, it's take a wait and see approach still for the next couple of years, but generally keeping them in the corporation. If it's corporate dollars that have been used to purchase them, then it makes sense in my opinion. Is a minute book required for small businesses? I always like to say yes on this one. It is. It's not required necessarily, but it is always a good thing to have. And the reason for that is when you get a business set up, it's very simple to get your minute book set up with it. And for that extra couple $100, it can save you thousands of dollars in the future. And the reason for this, as a business grows, things are always changing. And so down the road, you might buy some assets. You might go in and, if you're not buying assets, you might go and have a partner join the business. Or there's any type of numerous things, get some funding and loans that the banks or partners or potential investors will want to see your minute book. If you haven't done your minute book up front and you haven't kept it up to date, it could cost you thousands of dollars to get it cleaned up in the future. Not only that, if it's not clean and clear from the get-go, you might have some issues come up from a tax standpoint if things aren't done properly, if you get CRA audits and things like that. So my recommendation for the small cost it is up front, build it into the cost of getting the company going and get it done from the get-go. Let's see here, another question that popped up. How does RMI support small businesses? What kind of services does RMI provide? Great question. And so RMI is a full service accounting firm. I'm happy to announce that we actually even do audits now. So we do everything from your basic bookkeeping up till audit level work, including review engagement, audit engagements, regular compilations, tax returns on the corporate personal side. And the one thing that we always like to preach is we do give professional service with a personal touch. And that is that we'll always be here to answer your phones. I know many people struggle with getting answers from accountants because it's an industry where people just get overwhelmed and very busy. But the way we've managed to structure our firm is we've built it up a bit bigger. We have a great team, so there's always somebody here who can help you out and answer your questions at all times. Next question here. What are some common challenges new businesses face and how can I avoid them? Great question. And I'll repeat this one because it deserves repeating, and that is the biggest reason why I see businesses fail is poor cash flow management. And so what happens a lot of times is you're making enough money, but you're not paying attention to what's coming up. And then what ends up happening is you run out of money. And as soon as you run out of cash, you end up in a position where you're going to have to shut down usually. And so the number one thing I tell people is really focus on the cash flow management component. When you have businesses that have AR, inventory, things that require extra cash that people don't consider about, that's where issues can really arise. The other big one, of course, is just not planning up front. It's running a business is a little bit different, right? And so when you start a business, you really want to make sure you have a good plan in place and not just jump in with 2 feet, because you need to make sure you got a good game plan. You got to plan for what expenses might come up. You got to plan for how you're going to cover those expenses, and you got to give a starting period. A lot of people say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go start a business tomorrow. Doesn't mean you're making a sale tomorrow. So you got to give it some time to actually grow and establish itself. And the more leeway you can give yourself, the more time you can do planning, I think will help you for sure get successful. Next question there. How can I budget for unexpected expenses in my business? That's great, and great question to consider. In year one, of course, it's very difficult because you don't know what's unexpected. In year two, you might get a better sense and then have less unexpected expenses. But when you start up, you always want to make sure you budget for that, right? And the more talking you can do to people in the same industry you're jumping into, talking to people like accountants, getting a good sense of what expenses you need to account for, then that will help you. But I always warn people, like your first year or two, whatever you're planning for, make sure you're increasing it by 20 or 50%, because there is going to really be an indication there where you're going to forget stuff, and it happens at all levels. So you want to make sure you have a budget in there for miscellaneous expenses, and then you can factor in as much as you can to cover that. Thanks for sending your guys' questions. As always, it's Irfanali with RMI doing our quarterly one-on-one call. So hopefully you're able to hop on, or if you're watching this on recording, thanks for watching. And I'm just going through some questions that are popping in here. So another one was, what should I know about invoicing and getting paid on time? Great question. Invoicing is exciting, but that doesn't mean that's cash in your bank, and that's the number one thing to remember. So when you send out an invoice, you have to remember, your customer hopefully is happy about that and will pay it right away. Once it's collected, then you're comfortable. But if they don't pay it, a lot of times people want 30 days to pay. And if they want 30 days to pay, you got to make sure you're budgeting, because you're going to pay your staff, or you're going to buy your inventory, and then you can collect it from them. But remember, just invoicing doesn't mean that you're actually getting money in the bank, and you got to be very careful with any receivables you might have. You got to stay on top of them. And the big thing is, the risk is really when they're reoccurring clients, they'll pay you when you need when they need your service again. But if they're not a reoccurring client, there's a good chance they may never pay you, and then you'd have to go after them. So you have to consider some of these factors about when you're deciding how much money you want, how you're going to do your invoicing. Are you going to take deposits up front? Are you comfortable giving them 30 days to pay? So it is very important to really plan out how you're going to manage your cash flow and how you're going to invoice and make sure you're collecting. How can I tell if my business idea is profitable? Great question there, and the biggest one is really on that one. The biggest one is really talking to people, right? What industry do you want to work in? Talk to people in that industry. Are they successful already? Have you seen people be successful? And then planning that out. What I tell a lot of people is, many industries have successful businesses, but it's more about the operations around it. And so again, you might say, okay, I want to open up a restaurant. Well, some restaurants are very successful and some don't make it past 6 months or a year. So it's a matter of saying, okay, my business idea, I talked to enough people, it seems to make sense and it's profitable. Now the next step is going to be planning it out, making sure you do a good business plan, do your financial projections, get a good idea of how you're going to be able to fund it. How are you going to manage economic changes and pitfalls and scenarios that might not look so good? And then once you put that in place and you can actually make it run, then hopefully you can achieve that profitability you're looking for. Do you guys have a course or short guided videos I can access on how to be more strategic with my accounting so I'm not overpaying on taxes? Great question, and I do videos on that are available on YouTube and TikTok and any of our social media channels there. We don't have any specific courses or not, but if there's topics you want me to do a video on, please send them over, and happy to hop on a video and talk more about it. So we do have quite a bit. They're all accessible through our website or our social media channels, and hopefully that can answer some of your questions there. How important is networking? What are some effective ways to network? Great question on that one too. From a business standpoint, when I was younger, one of my mentors once said, your network is your net worth. And so who you can find, who you can work with is going to really depict how good of a business you can run. So your network to me is everything, right? And when I got this business going many years ago, my very first clients were people that I've known for years prior. And so that's what establishes your initial, for me especially, that's what got my business going, right? Is the fact that I had a strong network. I knew a lot of people in the area. I knew a lot of people in the business community. And I built that network by being really just active and engaging in whatever was out there. Joining different business groups, attending a lot of different networking groups and ventures, being part of different communities. And then all of a sudden you start to talk to people, and that's the best way you can learn. And when you're learning these things, knowledge, I always say, knowledge is power, right? So the more you know, the more successful that you can be. So to me, you can never network enough. I wish I could do it more, but with a young family these days, I haven't been doing it as much as I would like to. But of course, get out as much as you can, get out to different events, get out to talking to people, because that can really make you super successful. Another question here, how can I manage and understand risk as a small business? Great question here. And so the big thing on this side is managing risk is, how can I manage and understand risk as a small business owner? So it's a great question, right? And so the biggest thing is how can really identifying the risks first and foremost. So when you're talking about identifying the risks, the biggest thing you need to really do is talk to more people in that business, really do more research, get ahead of it up front, because once you understand your risks of your business, now you can start to plan how you're going to mitigate it. In any business plan, there's a question about business plan earlier. In any good business plan, you're going to have a section on your risks, right? And really put some thought around it, saying, what are my risks when I'm running this business? And you got to consider things like, okay, I might have cash flow risk with AR and inventory and different things like that. And in that instance, then you got to plan what's the best way to mitigate it. How much extra cash do you need to have? How much can you even grow in a business? I know of many successful businesses that just kept growing and growing and growing, but they ended up having to shut down because they weren't managing their cash flow very well. So just different things like that you can always keep in mind, and make sure that you're planning in advance for your risk, and talk to more people, do more research online, because that's the best way to have that success, by making sure you open up all your blinders up front. How can I keep track of my income and expenses easily? Great question here. Excel is great to start out, and then once you kind of used Excel to its max, the next big thing that you can look at is a bookkeeping software. So a good example is we use QuickBooks or Xero quite often in the office, and that tends to work really well. So what happens is when you're doing your day-to-day bookkeeping, the reason we like those softwares very much is because they're very easy to do. You don't need to have a strong accounting background. It talks about, okay, I need to do an invoice, click here to make an invoice. I have expenses, click here. I need to pay checks, click here. And so those softwares are very good to end up keeping track of things on a regular basis. Like anything, the most important thing is you got to keep it up to date. For your business especially, you got to keep it up to date regularly. And I've seen many businesses start up and they ignore this component, right? And when you start up a business, if you want to be successful in it, get on this properly. Get tracking your numbers right away. Get tracking on recording things properly. Because when your accountant comes to you a year from now saying, okay, well, what was this $20,000 spent for? A lot of times it's like, I don't know, and now you're spending hours trying to figure it out. when you're already day to day is going to be very busy as an entrepreneur. So using softwares from the get-go, plan it in advance. When you're small and just getting going, it's the best time to do it, because now you got time to play with it, you got time to make mistakes with it, you got time to make use of it and really learn how to use it properly. So then when you do start to scale your business and get bigger, you're already ready to go, which is nice. Next question, what strategies can I use to build strong relationships with my clients? Oh, that's a great question. I can talk on this one forever, but I won't go that long. One of the best things that I love, and I always tell everybody, myself, and I've learned about this quite a bit, and it's the DISC personality types assessment. And I loved it so much, I got my wife on it, and she ended up getting certified in this. And it's something we always love to talk about and use all the time. And when you understand somebody's personality, you know how to deal with them. And so it's one of my favorite things to use all the time in terms of when you're dealing with a client, if they're a very strong personality, how do you engage with them? How do you make sure that their needs are met? When you've got somebody who's soft-spoken, it's the complete opposite. But you, as the salesperson or the business owner, you're the one who needs to be able to adapt in order to attract that customer. So for me, it's one of my most favorite tools to use. If you're not sure about it, there's lots of information online, or always feel free to reach out, because it's a topic I can talk on and on about. But for interest of time, I'll end it there for now. What does it mean to scale a business? Great question. So scaling a business basically means growing, right? And so a business always goes through different trajectories and different life cycles. When you start a business, it's going to be really small. It's going to be you who's running everything. You're going to get to a certain level where all of a sudden it's like, okay, I need to have some employees. So you bring on a team and you have some employees. Then you scale it to another level where now you need to say, okay, well, I need some management in place because we're getting busier. And soon you're going to need an executive team and some people at higher levels. And you might need a business development person who's going to take over doing sales and different elements to it. So when you're talking about scaling a business, it's just really which level you're at in your business and how to get to the next level. How should I consider my sales if my third-party organization deducts my sales for service fees? Yeah, great question. So I think on this one, how should I consider my sales? So what happens in this instance, so just to clarify the question from my understanding, is what will happen is sometimes you'll have a customer, they're going to pay you, but they're going to be a cost to paying you, so they'll deduct that on their end. So you might invoice them for $1,000, but they're going to end up paying you $950, for example. And in this instance, how do you record it? Well, your sale is still $1,000. The $50, just because they're not paying you, doesn't mean that it's you're not part of your income. The $50 is actually an expense for you at the end of the day. And so what should happen is your $1,000 in my example should be recorded as income. Your $50 that they're withholding for the service fee should be an expense for you, and your net profit or your net gross revenue ends up being $950 that's coming into your bank account. So it does get tricky in using the softwares and recording it, but of course if you ever need help, we're here to help with any of that kind of stuff. What do you think makes Calgary unique in terms of business success? I'm a true born Calgarian. I'm not born here, but I moved here when I was 3, so I love the city. Not only do I think it's a great city to raise a family, but when you look at it from a Canadian standpoint, it's probably one of the most entrepreneurial cities in Canada, if not North America. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is when you live in this city, when you engage with people in this city, you really start to get a sense of that entrepreneurship feel that a lot of people talk about. A lot of people aren't scared to go and jump and do a business here. When you go to other cities, you still have a mentality where a lot of people are more fearful of making that change. But here people have that drive and that passion, and I think that's what makes it very unique and a very exciting city to be in terms of when you want that entrepreneurial growth and to start a business. What should I consider when deciding to hire my first employee? Great question. Hiring an employee is a big step, and the reason for that is because it's the next piece where people get in trouble. And why I say that is there's two things that CRA really is concerned about more than anything, and that's GST and employee source deductions. So I'll touch on both of them quickly with this question, and that is GST is a trust account, because when you charge GST to a customer, the government is saying that you're doing that on their behalf. Therefore, it's not your money. So if I go charge somebody $1,000 for a service and I charge them $50 for GST, that $50 I'm collecting is not my money, it's actually the government's money. And so what they want to see is that you're taking care of that and that you're remitting it back to them on time without going and getting into trouble. Why that becomes an issue is if you can't pay it, that actually falls on director's liability. So you as the director of the business would be personally liable for that extra $50. Now when it comes to having an employee, the same situation applies. Because as a director of the corporation, you need to actually calculate the withholding tax. So a lot of times an employee, okay, they're getting paid for the period, let's say $1,000. Well, their net check might only be $600 or $650 because you as the business owner need to hold back the $350 for their taxes. Well, that $350 the government views as a trust account again. And when it's viewed as a trust account, that means if you do not pay that to the government, they can come after you personally for that money. So the most important thing when you're actually hiring an employee, make sure you've talked to somebody, make sure you understand how to do these calculations, make sure you got a good system to do these calculations, and make sure you're paying the government on time. Because what happens with GST and source deductions, people fall behind so quickly because they don't prioritize it, they don't do it up front. And as soon as they fall behind on it, then you're in trouble, because now the next 3 years you're trying to get out of a jam of digging yourself into a big hole. So it's always good to get ahead of it and do it properly from the get-go. Next question here was, what should I look for when choosing a bank for my business accounts? Another really good question. I get this very often actually, and what I tell most people, to me, banks, the fees is going to be very similar wherever you are. Obviously pay attention to it, but I think it's a very minimal component of the decision. To me, the most important thing is, do you have somebody good to work with at the bank, and are they going to be there long term, right? And so whether you're choosing a credit union, whether you're using one of the big banks or a smaller bank, it doesn't really matter to me. The most important is who's there. Can I trust that they're going to be there long term to look after my needs? Can they help me get financing when I need to get financing? Can they help me make sure that my accounts, are they managing my accounts properly? Can they help me do complex transactions like wires when I need to do that? And that is what I'm mostly looking for when choosing a bank for my businesses. What are some tips for managing my cash flow? Very good question. There's actually, with the evolution of AI, there's some very good tools out there. I haven't played around with it enough yet to be able to recommend any. Where we're testing out a few right now. But that's one of the big things is if you're able to use one of these tools to manage your cash flow, that's going to help. The other component of it really is if you stay up to date with your books. Any good bookkeeping software like QuickBooks, for example, will be able to spit out a cash flow report for you. So you can see where your cash is actually being spent, how much you need to have, and where the changes are coming. And if you can pay close attention to that kind of stuff, that can really help. A lot of people just ignore it. The other component is understanding the difference between cash accounting and accrual accounting. And the big difference is when you're talking cash accounting, people will record what comes out of their bank account. But what people forget is checks have become more obsolete lately. When you cut a check to somebody and that does not get cashed on the other side, it's really already come out of your bank account. So when you can manage your bookkeeping on an accrual basis, you'll really get a better sense of how much cash you have available. A lot of times people will make a mistake, and what they will do is say, hey, I've written out $20,000 of checks and I've got $30,000 in my account. They think they still have $30,000 available, which is not true. Because once those $20,000 gets cashed in, that's going to disappear really quickly. So paying attention to that kind of component and really managing accrual accounting versus cash accounting can help on that side. Thanks for all the questions here. I know there's more coming in, so I'll get to as many as I can. In your opinion, is it more cost effective to hire my own payroll person or outsource that service to a third party? It really depends on how big and where you're at, how big the payroll is, if it's just one individual or if you've got a whole team you got to pay for. Payroll is one of those things that can get very complex the more individuals you have. A lot of times for businesses just starting up and you have just one individual, if you can do it yourself, great, it saves you that extra cost. If you don't have the time, then outsource it and hire somebody. The nice thing is payroll is one of those things. There is a cost associated with it, but it's not very substantial usually. Like if you have only a couple employees, you're not paying more than $50 a month in terms of getting somebody to process that for you. So it's one of those easy things that you can pass off. But the catch is when you pass it off, it doesn't mean it's completely passed off either. If you got an employee that's hourly, for example, you still have to manage that employee, get their hours in, what's the approved hours they have, understand the stat rules, whether you got to pay them or not, submit that to the third-party payroll company that can then process that for you. So just because you're passing it off doesn't mean that it is not, that it's completely hands-off either. Next question here, do I need a year-end package for applying credit card for my business? Some financial institutions will ask you for your financials to apply for credit, including credit cards. So it is important to make sure you're doing that. If you're just starting a brand new business, a lot of times the businesses will go based on personal credit. Or sorry, the banks will go off of your personal credit. So you don't always need it, but a lot of times if you're applying for credit after a couple of years, they'll want to see how successful the business has been. And the more successful that it's been, the more they'll be able to approve you for. A lot of times banks will also encompass this into an overall lending component, and so that would work out well as well. I know we're running out of time here, but there's one more question that I'll get to, and that is, do I need an accountant when starting my business, or can I manage my own initially? If you understand the rules around it, then yes, you can do it yourself. But accounting for business is very complex, and you really got to have a good understanding about how the debits and credits work and how tax planning works and all of those. So my recommendation is, if it's a small sole proprietorship and you've done your own taxes for a few years and you got a basic understanding, more than happy to say do it yourself. But once it starts to get into an incorporation and you get more complex, you probably want to have a good accountant to work with, somebody who can guide you on your structure, not just be a tax preparer for you, but somebody who can guide you on your structure, give you advice on tax expenses, and of course end up filing appropriately and taking care of your books, or working with you to take care of your books on a regular basis. So thank you everybody for all the questions today. As always, you can reach out to us at RMI here. We're happy to answer any other questions that might come along. And once again, we'll see you next quarter, but it's Irfanali Moledina, Managing Partner at RMI LLP. Thank you.